When Walter and I went to visit my in-laws, my mother-in-law, who came to pick us up at the airport, said, "You can't ride in the car, so you must walk home." She snorted and turned up her nose. It's a 3-hour journey one way, and though I'm confident in my physical strength, this treatment was too much. I almost cried, but someone reached out to help me. In the end, it was mother-in-law who regretted it. My name is Jennifer. I'm 30 years old and married. I love mountain climbing, and I met my husband Walter, who is 2 years younger, in a college mountain club. Walter is handsome and popular with women, and when he asked me out, I wondered, why me? According to Walter, Jennifer moves forward silently, even on the hardest routes without complaining, and I like that about her. Walter works for a well-known corporation and earns a high salary. We've been living happily together since our marriage, just like our student days. But there's one thing that bothers me. Oh, it's a call from Mom. Sorry, I'll go talk to her. During dinner, Walter said that and hurried into his room with his mobile phone. Mother-in-law calls Walter frequently, about once every 2 days. Mother-in-law seems to adore her excellent son, and Walter is sweet to mother-in-law, making me suspect he's a mama's boy. But since she raised Walter with care, I think I should value her too. However, it seems our feelings are different. It happened before our marriage, when we went to greet my in-laws. Jennifer is 2 years older than my son? Almost 30, huh? Mother-in-law seemed displeased with having an older daughter-in-law and looked unhappy throughout. Father-in-law said, "It's fine, isn't it? Love conquers all. Jennifer seems reliable, and she's perfect for Walter, who has a weak side." But that seemed to displease her even more. Mother-in-law seemed unable to oppose father-in-law directly, so she decided to bully me without him noticing. "Oh dear, I'm sorry, Jennifer. It seems the snacks I served you have gone bad. I'll replace them right away." When mother-in-law intentionally harassed me, she would open her eyes wide, snort, and twist her lips. I had become like a zoologist, able to distinguish her expressions. "Oh, it's okay. I can eat it." I smiled and cut off the spoiled part of the dried fruit and ate it. I had learned survival skills in the mountain club. Eat what you can of the food. Father-in-law and Walter said, "Haha, that's just like Jennifer." Father-in-law added, laughing, "Honey, that's not good. Don't serve Jennifer something like that." The atmosphere remained pleasant, but... I was careless. I'm sorry. While laughing, I didn't miss her brief, sharp look and a click of her tongue. There were other instances, like when she said, "Look, I went to Italy last week and bought souvenirs," and pulled out a high-quality branded tie for Walter. For me, it was a flimsy t-shirt with a fake-looking logo that was obviously a knockoff brand. "Come on, try on the tie. Jennifer, you try on the shirt too." At that moment, mother-in-law's face showed that familiar expression, and I realized it was another harassment. No? I can't wear a tie with casual clothes." I'm not up for it right now either. I forced a smile to keep the atmosphere light, but inside I was fed up. Afterward, I only used that t-shirt for things like weeding in the summer or as a joke to show my friends in photos. I really hate even looking at it. These harassments were subtle enough that only I would recognize them as such. And when I told Walter, he would just say, "Mom's a bit quirky, so forgive her." However, the malice I felt little by little gradually wore me down. The town where we live is about an hour's drive from my in-laws, and the fact that we could easily visit them if we wanted to was also a source of gloom. Then one day, "Jennifer, I'm sorry for the sudden news, but I've been transferred. It starts next month, so please prepare." Walter's sudden transfer was decided. Walter apologized, but I was secretly relieved to have an excuse to distance ourselves from my in-laws. Plus, the new location was very close to my parents' home, so it felt like moving from away to home. Got it. Leave the preparations to me. I'll ask my family for help too. I happily proceeded with the preparations. Now I can get away from mother-in-law's petty harassment. I was anxious about our new life, but 80% of my heart was occupied by the feeling of liberation from mother-in-law. The move was completed, and I thought I could finally distance myself from mother-in-law, but... Hello, Jennifer. Where have you been without answering the phone? You're not neglecting my son while hanging out at your parents' house again, are you? It was another call from mother-in-law. I wanted to sigh heavily, but held back and replied, "I'm sorry I couldn't answer the phone earlier. I was in line at the checkout. Walter might be tired in this unfamiliar environment, so I want to support him with nutritious meals." Mother-in-law's calls started coming every 2 days. Although we saw each other less, we talked more. Most of the time, it was my mother-in-law unilaterally making snide remarks. "My son is sensitive, but I wonder if someone as thick-skinned as Jennifer can understand him. My son's high school girlfriend was a delicate and fragile girl, but his taste has changed quite a bit, hasn't it?" And so on, saying only things that would make me uncomfortable. Does mother-in-law have no other outlet for her stress? I felt like I had become a trash can labeled stress outlet. What hurt the most were the snide comments about children. "Jennifer, you're already 30, aren't you? What do you think about children? I wonder if you, being older than my son, can have a normal child." I was shocked that someone would say such a thing in this day and age, but since it was something I had been concerned about recently, tears flowed after I hung up the phone. What does mother-in-law think of me? Does she think I won't be hurt by whatever she says? After that, the calls kept coming frequently, but when I responded only with safe answers to avoid making waves, perhaps she found it boring and not worth bullying, so the number of calls gradually decreased. I was truly relieved from the bottom of my heart. Then, on New Year's Day the following year, my husband and I headed to my in-laws' house. They were going to pick us up from the airport. "Hey, Walter, Jennifer, long time no see." Father-in-law waved and greeted us. I was honestly dreading seeing mother-in-law, but father-in-law's friendliness was a relief. "Happy New Year, Mom and Dad." "Happy New Year to you both." "Happy New Year, I'm glad you came." "Happy New Year, Walter, good to see you." We exchanged New Year's greetings, but mother-in-law didn't even look at me. Perhaps she was angry about my cold response to her frequent calls. It was an awkward relationship. I was thinking about how to get through this situation. "You must be tired from the journey. Shall we take a break at the airport cafe?" Father-in-law cheerfully suggested, seemingly unaware of the tense atmosphere between mother-in-law and me. "Oh, that's a good idea. Wasn't there a cafe on the second floor?" Walter responded cheerfully, and we moved to a cafe inside the airport. "Should I drive back?" "No, I'm still an active driver." While the men were chatting away, mother-in-law and I were silent. "Excuse me, I'm going to the restroom." After ordering, I said that and got up from my seat. "Oh, maybe I'll go too," mother-in-law said, standing up to follow me. I had a bad feeling about this. Just as the entrance to the women's restroom came into view, mother-in-law walking behind me said, "You can't ride in the car, so why don't you walk back?" Not understanding what she meant, I turned to look at mother-in-law, and there was that expression again. We're going back as a family of 3. You're a stranger, aren't you? I couldn't believe my ears. Walk back? From here to my in-laws' house? How far could that be? And calling her son's wife a stranger? While I was frozen in shock, mother-in-law continued to throw words at me. I was kind enough to call you frequently, but unlike Walter, you only respond coldly. Living near your parents' house has gotten to your head. I don't want to think of you as my daughter-in-law. You're a stranger. A stranger. Mother-in-law's voice was getting louder. I was shocked, but I didn't want to argue in public, so I answered in a small voice, yes, I understand. I didn't feel like going back to where Walter and father-in-law were, so I headed to the airport exit, plodding along. Even though she told me to walk back, this was an airport. There must be taxis and buses. I could go as far as I could and walk from there. But more than that, what face should I make when I safely arrive at my in-laws' house by walking? How should I spend the few days of my stay? That weighed more heavily on my mind. For now, I searched on my mobile phone for transportation to my in-laws' house. There was a bus leaving in just 10 minutes, but that bus wouldn't go near my in-laws' house, so from there, it seemed I would have to walk. It might take about 3 hours in total. 3 hours. I can walk that. With my legs trained in mountain climbing, it's not impossible. But there's a difference between walking for mountain climbing and walking because I'm not allowed in the car due to harassment. Tears welled up in my eyes. Was it my fault? If I had been pleasant on the phone even after being told such things, would this have happened? As I was walking along, lost in thought, I was suddenly tapped on the shoulder from behind. Jennifer, why are you walking here? The voice was father-in-law's. Didn't my wife say something to you at the entrance to the restroom? I was going to the restroom too, and I saw you and my wife talking, and then you started to go somewhere, so I followed you. Looking at father-in-law's kind face, the tears that had been welling up in my eyes overflowed and ran down my cheeks. Jennifer, what on earth happened? I decided to tell father-in-law the truth. Actually, I told father-in-law exactly what mother-in-law had said, and he became angrier than I had ever seen him. How dare she say that to my son's wife? Then he said something I never expected. I'll walk with you, Jennifer. With that, father-in-law stood in front of me and started walking. Father-in-law? Don't worry, I enjoy mountain climbing, and I used to climb a lot with Walter when he was little. A 3-hour one-way walk is nothing. Indeed, father-in-law's stride was firm, not what you'd expect from a 62-year-old. Come on, let's go. We didn't tell Walter we were leaving. Is that okay? I finally remembered that. In my shock at mother-in-law's words, I had just left. Walter will be fine. She'll probably talk him into waiting. I'll contact him. With that, father-in-law took out his mobile phone. It seemed he was texting mother-in-law. He told her he was walking back with me and that the car keys were in his bag. As we waited for the bus, father-in-law's mobile phone rang. Father-in-law answered, his voice filled with restrained anger. It must have been mother-in-law on the other end. I heard what you said to Jennifer. If you're going to say that, I won't ride in the car either. I could hear mother-in-law's panicked voice shouting from the other end. That's not it. She said she wanted to walk for exercise. How brazen. I was more dumbfounded than angry. We'll talk when we get home. Father-in-law hung up and shoved his mobile phone into his pocket. Perhaps because father-in-law's mobile phone was unreachable, mine started ringing next. It's definitely mother-in-law. Father-in-law and I looked at each other. What does she want now? To tell us to ride in the car? I'm definitely not answering. I decided to ignore it too. Father-in-law and I silently boarded the bus and continued to walk after getting off.
This way is a shortcut. There's a slope here for a while, but let's do our best.
With father-in-law occasionally giving advice, it felt like we were mountain climbing together. However, I hadn't planned on walking so much today and was wearing regular boots. Father-in-law was wearing leather shoes. This will surely hurt our feet. During the journey, I hardly spoke, but I did ask once, Father-in-law, are your feet okay? Won't walking for a long time in those shoes hurt your feet? Father-in-law glanced at my feet and squinted.
I guess we're in the same boat. Making a woman walk such a long distance in those shoes. I can't believe her.
Father-in-law sighed. We both thought of calling a taxi, but neither of us mentioned it, intending to spite mother-in-law.
But Jennifer, you're strong. Walking such a long distance without complaining? Walter must have been attracted to that quality in you.
Hearing that, I felt a little happy. Afterward, we continued to walk, buying drinks from vending machines and a grocery store to stay hydrated. About 3 hours later, as the sun began to set, we finally arrived at my in-laws' house. Their car was parked in front of the house. Mother-in-law and Walter must be home.
We're back.
As father-in-law opened the front door, Walter rushed over.
Dad, Jennifer, I was worried. What happened? Why did you suddenly decide to walk back for exercise? Did you hear that from Mom? That's not it. Mom told Jennifer to walk back.
Father-in-law said, looking understandably tired, as he sat down on a chair near the entrance. Mother-in-law, who had come out of the living room, was pale and gaping. No, that's not it. That's not it. It seems there was a misunderstanding.
What was the misunderstanding?
I couldn't keep quiet any longer. You said, since you can't ride in the car, why don't you walk back? Didn't you? This was the plain truth. I hate lying. Thanks to that, I was reminded of my mountain climbing club days. A 3-hour one-way walk was good exercise. Walter looks back at mother-in-law. He knows well that I'm not the type to lie. The eyes of father-in-law, Walter, and I were all on mother-in-law. What? You believe this woman over me? We three are family. This woman is a stranger, right? You believe a stranger over your family? Mother-in-law screamed. So, I was not allowed in the car because I'm a stranger, I said quietly.
Mom, I can't believe you would say something like that. Jennifer is an important part of my family. I wanted you to feel the same way.
Walter said, clenching his fist. His hand was trembling with anger.
If you're going to treat Jennifer like this, I'm done with you, Mom. I won't answer your calls anymore. Don't contact Jennifer either.
Walter took my hand and said,
Let's go.
Walter, wait. Walter slammed the door and, without looking back, took my hand and started walking. A year later.
Hey, Jennifer, Walter, over here. You can see the view really well.
Walter, father-in-law, and I were mountain climbing together. Walter received a transfer order 6 months later, and we moved back to our previous home. After the incident at the New Year celebration, father-in-law decided to divorce and moved alone near our house. Climbing together on weekends had become a regular thing.
Shall we have lunch here?
At the summit, we eagerly began preparing our meal. While working, father-in-law started talking.
Mom went on a spending spree after the divorce. Even though the property division was done properly, it seems she's already in financial trouble. She might have been lonely. The divorce was tough, with all the crying and screaming. Putting some distance between us now is probably best for both of us.
That's how it felt.
she should expand her world too. Otherwise, she's the type to take out her stress on those close to her.
I listened silently to their conversation. I'll cherish my own world, so I don't have to take out my stress on others. Looking at the view from the mountain with my precious family, I made that resolution in my heart.
I got my mistress pregnant. We need to break up. That's how my husband Camille apologized to me in such a flippant manner. I was dumbfounded, and my affection for him ran out. It was exactly 6 months ago. Is the mistress someone I know? Yeah, it's Kyra. Remember meeting her again at Alice's wedding reception. Since then, my husband seemed completely unashamed. Alice's wedding was the year before last. So you've been cheating for over a year? Alice was a college classmate of mine, and the mistress Kyra was a junior who 2 years behind me. She was in the same research group as Alice, and we played tennis together in college, so I remember her well. She was nicknamed Little Devil behind her back, and was quite famous in a way. Huh, oh, is that so? Time flies when you get older. My husband just laughed it off. What on earth is he thinking? I can't understand him at all. I'm Viola, 30 years old. I met my husband in the college tennis club. Despite him being 5 years older at 35, the reason he knew me was that he was an alumnus who often showed up. He loved happy hours, had lots of friends, and was friendly with everyone. He took great care of the freshmen and was a kind person. I only realized that it was limited to girls after we started dating. I was made to cry many times due to his cheating habits back then, but I loved him and married him right after graduation. But once I started working, I got to know the real him, or rather, his useless side. The reason he frequently appeared in the tennis club's clubhouse, acting all high and mighty with the juniors, was that he was completely ignored by his peers. The truth was that he was so incompetent at his job that he wasn't given any serious responsibilities, so he had a lot of free time. Even now, there is no prospect of a raise or promotion. He's just a pretentious good-for-nothing who can't do his job or household chores. He is utterly useless. I tried various things to change my husband after we got married, but his refusal to change made me give up. The reason I hadn't divorced him was not just that work was busy and it was a hassle, but also because his parents were good people, a reason that had nothing to do with my husband himself. So, look, we need to split up quickly because of the baby coming. You can have this apartment, and I'll leave. That's the end of it, okay? I was taken aback with his careless words, and my husband with a sly grin. What? No way. Let's part ways cleanly. This is not a good opportunity. As I neared my 40s, I started wanting a child. I had graduated college and started working as a full-time employee. I was earning more than my husband, and my company had great parental and maternity leave benefits. I was ready for a baby, but it wasn't happening, and it was heartbreaking. There was no love left for my husband, who had an affair and got the other woman pregnant. I wanted to completely and cleanly end the relationship. What made me even angrier was that he didn't apologize at all. He just spoke his needs and demands without any remorse. It was clearly time to end this unpleasant relationship that had lasted for years. We'll involve a lawyer, ask for compensation, and divide the property. Of course, we'll request something from Kyra too. What? I don't have that kind of savings. and Kyra's pregnant. I don't want to stress her out. Well then, why don't you take on the debt and pay for it yourself? It's your affair that caused this separation, so take responsibility properly. When I glared at my husband, he raised his hands in surrender. I guess I have no choice. Maybe my dad will take on the debt for me. With that, I moved forward with the divorce and hired a lawyer. I received multiple calls from my in-laws, pleading and begging me not to leave. My father-in-law even cried, saying, "If Viola leaves him, he's finished." And my mother-in-law begged, "Please reconsider, Viola. I love you like my own daughter." But I couldn't go back. After revealing everything about my husband's constant infidelity and laziness at home, even they finally understood. "We are truly sorry," they said, bowing their heads in shame. They even paid the compensation in a lump sum on behalf of my husband, who had no savings. They made him promise never to ask for their help with that again and to repay them promptly. I still can't understand how such a careless and irresponsible man came from such decent and responsible parents. I'm going back to my parents' house. The divorce process, which I had thought would be a hassle, was over before I knew it. I returned to my recently relocated family home, and half a year passed by. I had stopped thinking about my ex-husband, busy with work on weekdays and cleaning the house on weekends. I received a call from my best friend, Alice. Alice was furious from the start. "Viola, did you know? Your ex-husband Camille and Kyra, they are living in a new high-rise apartment and bragging about it everywhere. Kyra just called me for a baby shower party. The presents have to be over $100 and the participant fee is $100 too. It's insane, right?" she yelled. I didn't know that Kyra had given birth, and I didn't understand why she had even contacted Alice. My ex-husband knew it, and so did Kyra. They both knew that Alice is my best friend. Why would Kyra even invite Alice? She must know that Alice would tell me everything. When I said this hesitantly, Alice's anger erupted even more. "She did it on purpose, on purpose." That horrible woman said, "I'm so happy now, thanks to Viola breaking up with Camille." Can you believe she would tell me that? She's the worst kind of person. I want to put her in her place somehow. Little devil from our student days has finally grown into a demon, hasn't she? In college, Kyra was a bad woman, meddling with the men of happy couples. Even if couples fought because of her, she kept a calm face. If they break up just because another girl shows interest, it's not true love, right? They'll break up eventually anyway. So, what's the big deal? She would say, stretching her words in a saccharine voice, smirking. I pitied her, thinking she had never truly loved anyone, but I wasn't naive enough to get involved with her. I decided to keep my distance. For now, I didn't care about Kyra. There was something else I couldn't ignore. Alice, speaking of which, there's only one newly built high-rise apartment building, right? Did you hear when they moved in, or anything? I've never met them. Alice quickly answered. Apparently, it was very recently. They were bragging about getting in luckily because a spot opened up. It seemed someone who bought a new high-rise apartment had to relocate for work and had put it back on the market without moving in. I see. That makes sense then. Viola, your moving day is this Sunday, right? The baby shower party is on Saturday. So, you only have to be careful for one day. There are plenty of elevators, and the entrances might be even different. You're right, we haven't met so far, so it should be fine. Alice and I laughed together, but an unexpected situation still occurred. On Saturday, I ran into my ex-husband and Kyra in the first floor elevator hall. My ex and Kyra were getting off the elevator, and I was waiting for it. Our eyes met perfectly, and there was no escape. "Hey, Viola, what are you doing here?" My ex-husband was the first to speak. Then Kyra chimed in. "Viola, are you here to celebrate with us? You wanted to see our adorable baby, didn't you?" Her voice was bright and sweet, her face smiling, but her eyes weren't laughing at all. "What? Seriously? You came to participate without an invitation? To observe? To see the high-rise apartment? Or our prince?" Hearing the baby referred to as baby and prince was irritating. "That's not it. I was just waiting for the elevator," I said, consciously, switching to a polite tone midway. Camille was my ex, but now a stranger, and I didn't want to cause a scene here. "Huh? So you're planning to come to my house after all? You're so silly, Viola. Stop being so stubborn. You're probably just jealous that we live in a super luxurious high-rise apartment and that our adorable prince was born. You still love me and feel lonely, don't you? Just admit it, you wanted to see me again." "Viola, that's not acceptable. No matter how much you love Camille, I'm the one he's married to now. It's a crime to barge into our home uninvited." "Jealous, are you? Kyra, you're really cute." "So sorry, Viola, but Kyra and our prince are my priority now. So you're not welcome here." I hadn't seen my ex-husband in 6 months, and his thoughts were as outlandish as ever. Kyra also seemed completely incomprehensible. My cheating ex-husband and his new lover were a perfect match in a way. I regretted wasting my precious 20s on my ex-husband. I'm utterly ashamed of having dated and married Camille. I wish to bury those memories in darkness. I should have left him sooner. I had not made excuses and just broken up with him. I wouldn't have had to listen to this nonsense from my ex-husband and his lover. I was shocked, but my words seemed to have struck a nerve with my ex-husband. "What's that? You're really lacking the charm. Learn from Kyra. Even her jealousy is cute. She's just giving birth, but still takes the effort to look stylish for me. Don't you think she's admirable? Aren't you embarrassed to be wearing such cheap clothes and no makeup?" "Not embarrassed at all. I was just going to the grocery store. I was wearing a simple white t-shirt and jeans. They weren't ragged, but they were clean." "That's exactly the problem. That's why I grew tired of you. Enough already. We have nothing to do with each other. Just go home." Annoyed by my indifferent tone, my ex-husband waved his hand as if shooing a dog or cat. "No, this is my house, actually. That's why I was waiting for the elevator." "What? Seriously? You're lying, right?" "Viola, that joke isn't funny at all." Seeing their unbelieving expressions, I had no choice but to explain. "I've been living with my parents in this high-rise apartment for 6 months now. My father was approached by the salespeople when there was talk of selling the land he owns here. They told him that living in a high-rise would be more convenient than a single-family home, especially as he's getting older. But it's not like the entire grounds of the high-rise was our land, it was just a part of it. Still, enough money came in from selling in, and during the negotiations, we were able to move into one of the higher floors for much less than market value." "What? You are landowners with that much money?" "If I'd known, I wouldn't have broken up with you. Give me back the compensation money. There was no need for a property settlement, was there? That's a separate matter. The compensation was a result of your affair, and the property settlement was the settlement between us as a married couple." I sighed. Glancing at Kyra, who was mumbling to herself without saying anything, I caught, "I can't believe Viola is living in a high-rise. I thought I had totally won." Kyra glared at me and said, "But Viola, you don't have a baby or a loving darling, do you? I haven't lost yet." "Look, I was never competing with you, Kyra. I'm actually thankful to you for giving me the opportunity to break up with Camille. Oh, and I'm moving out of my house tomorrow, so I don't think we'll see each other again." "What? Why? You've just moved into a high-rise." Both were surprised, but I shrugged. Maybe it's a matter of different values. It just wasn't a good fit for my family. I found living in a high-rise wasn't suitable for hanging laundry outside. There are no balconies on the higher floors for safety, and only some windows can be opened. It wasn't suitable for my mother and me, who want to dry our laundry and bedding in the natural sunlight and wind without using a dryer. Plus, the sunlight was intense, and it was too hot even with the air conditioning on. It shakes quite a bit even with a magnitude 3 earthquake. Apparently, the building is designed to sway to prevent collapse, and the higher floors shake more. It was terrifying. Most stressful of all was the daily elevator ride. It gets pretty crowded during the morning commute, and it takes time since it stops on each floor. The advertised 3 minutes walk from the station ends in the elevator. We were too bothered by the drawbacks unique to high-rise living, so we decided to live in a regular house with a garden after all. Luckily, our apartment sold quickly at almost the same price we bought it for. As I briefly explained, both my ex-husband and Kyra grinned. "Oh, so we'll never see each other again. So, a high-rise wasn't suitable for commoners like you. It's more suited for an elite celebrity family like mine." I couldn't understand how he came to that conclusion, but one thing became clear. What I grew to hate and gave up on was that part of you. Pretentious, but with no real ability to back it up. Unwilling to change or make an effort. I became utterly fed up with you. But it's okay now. You're unfixable. So, goodbye. I repeated my ex-husband's words, giving them right back to him. Stepping into the just arrived elevator, I glance at Kyra, who's glaring at my astonished ex-husband and me. Right before the doors close, I add one final remark. "By the way, are you sure the child is really yours?" "What do you mean?" My ex-husband looks at me, utterly confused. "I mean exactly what I said." "Right, Kyra? You know what I mean, don't you?" The doors closed then, so I don't know what happened next. In reality, when we were struggling to have a child, I underwent tests at the gynecologist's, and the results showed no problem on my end. So I started to wonder if the problem was with my husband, but he refused to get tested. That's why I left that insinuating comment. After that, I heard a story from a mutual friend who went to Kyra's baby shower. Despite bragging about living in a high-rise apartment, my ex-husband had been living on the 3rd floor. Plus, despite demanding expensive gifts and participant fees, the only food served were cheap snacks from the grocery store. When a friend softly complained, Kyra reportedly exploded, saying, "You should be grateful to see my baby up close and pay the money, of course." The atmosphere quickly became tense, and even though my ex-husband tried to mediate, things escalated into a massive fight between him and Kyra, resulting in a total mess. All thanks in part to my earlier cryptic remark. It seems my ex-husband and Kyra had moved into a high-rise, but life was tough, and they were trying to swindle money from their friends by fabricating reasons. Apparently, my ex-husband let it slip and their friends were furious and left. As for me, I successfully moved into a single-family house with a garden and started living with my family. Recently, I began keeping an adorable kitten. Our former high-rise had been found to have significant defects and illegal construction methods, and it's been in the news every day. Now, even if they want to sell, they can't. We talked as a family and concluded that maybe we were surprisingly lucky. I'm very happy now. My ties with my husband are severed, and I've achieved peaceful days. On a day off in the afternoon, as I fold the completely dry laundry, my kitten sometimes falls asleep on the clothes. Seeing that adorable sleeping face, I think to myself, today was another good day.
Why didn't you come to Mom's funeral, sis? What? I never thought you were such a terrible person. I was at a loss when my younger brother suddenly said this to me over the phone. But there was no sign of lying in his sobbing voice. James, Mom passed away 5 years ago, you know? My name is Jessica, a 30-year-old office worker. I'm dating a man named Robert, and we've just started seeing each other. He's serious about marrying me and wants to meet my parents soon. But I feel guilty about that. That's because my parents divorced a long time ago, and both of them have already passed away. My father and mother reached an irreparable state due to misunderstandings, and they ended up divorcing. At that time, I was 16. And after the divorce, I was taken in by my father. Even after the divorce, my father cared for me very much and allowed me to do anything I wanted. Thanks to him, I was able to continue learning the piano, which I had been doing since I was young and even attended cram school. In return, I did my best with the household chores, as long as it didn't interfere with my studies. I tried to cook dinner as much as possible, and although it was mostly rice balls, I prepared lunch for my father. The rice balls you make are always delicious, Jessica. I remember being happy when my father praised me like that. Then I went on to college. I worked hard in my studies, so I was able to get into a fairly prestigious university. Jessica, you did a great job. Going to a higher level university than your father and mother is amazing. I was very happy to see my father's joyful face. By the way, my father told me it was okay to see my mother, so I visited her regularly. Ah, big sister. James, long time no see. Jessica, have you been well? Yeah, how about you and James, Mom? I'm fine, and James has more energy than he knows what to do with. After the divorce, my mother lived with my younger brother, James. James is 7 years younger than me, and he was 11 when I decided to go to college. My elementary school-aged brother still had an innocent look, and he always looked very happy to see me. I was sad not to live with my brother, but I was happy to see him healthy and well when we met regularly. Jessica, you got into college? And it's a pretty tough one, isn't it? That's amazing. Sis, you're awesome. Thank you both. Let's go out for steak to celebrate today. Really? Yay! Wow, steak! Even though my parents were divorced, I had a good relationship with my mother and brother, and I always felt happy when I saw them. But after I started college, my mother remarried another man. Since then, it became difficult to see my brother. My husband wants me to get used to our life together, so he doesn't want me to see my previous family too much. Is that so? I felt mixed emotions when my mother told me this over the phone. Of course, I don't mind, and I'm very happy that my mother has remarried and found happiness. But I don't want to lose the opportunity to see my brother. Can't we just reduce the frequency of our meetings? I am sorry, but James is entering adolescence, and I don't want to confuse him too much. I see. But once we get used to our new life, I'm sure my husband will let us meet. Yeah, I understand. I wasn't really convinced, but I didn't want to protest and risk ruining my mother and brother's relationship with their new father, so I decided to endure it. After that, I finished college and got a job. During that time, I couldn't see my brother or mother. It's been 4 years. They could let me see them at least once. No, maybe they're living such fulfilling lives that they don't need to see me anymore. My brother, who was 11 at the time, is now 15. I want to send some encouragement to my brother, who is preparing for private high school entrance exams. With that thought, I bravely called my mother. Then I heard an unfamiliar man's voice.
Hello, who is this?
Isn't this my mother's number?
Are you Jessica by any chance?
Yes.
I'm David, the man who remarried your mother. She is busy right now, so I answered the phone.
Oh, I see.
What's the reason for your call?
Well, it's been 4 years since I last saw them, and I was thinking I'd like to see my brother and mother soon. When I said that, the man named David made a surprising statement.
Really? You haven't seen them?
What?
I thought you were meeting them regularly.
No, I haven't seen them at all.
I see. Maybe your mother doesn't want to see you.
What?
Actually, when I mentioned your name just now, my wife didn't react at all.
That can't be. Is James not around? I at least want my brother to respond to my call. I was thinking that, but David said,
James is right next to me, but he's just playing a game and not reacting at all. It seems like they've both forgotten about you and adapted to their current lives. They're both living happily. So, could you please leave them alone? I'm gonna hang up now.
With that, David hung up. I was so shocked that I couldn't move for a while after the call ended. I didn't want to believe that my brother and mother had forgotten about me and were living their lives. When I consulted my father, he said,
That's strange. Those two love you, Jessica.
And called my mother. But she told him, Please don't call again. And in the end, we couldn't meet or talk to my mother and brother. After that, I became busier with work and couldn't see my brother and mother, and time passed with them still in the back of my mind. Then, about 3 years after that phone call, I received sad news.
What? Mom!
It was a notification that my mother had died in a traffic accident. I rushed to the hospital. In the room where the hospital staff guided me, I saw my mother's lifeless body. Her face looked as if she was just sleeping, with her eyes closed and a gentle expression. No, Mom! I hadn't seen my mother in 7 years. I never thought I would meet her again like this. Sis? James! As I was mourning my mother's death, my brother came into the room. My brother, whom I hadn't seen in 7 years, had grown up completely. It's been a long time. Why didn't you come to see us? What? Did you start hating me and Mom? Wait a minute. It was your stepfather, David, who told me not to see you. Dad? Dad would never say something like that. What? Dad's an amazing person, and I look up to him. So he wouldn't say something like not meeting with you, sis. What? My brother seemed to trust our stepfather, David, quite a bit. They must have formed a strong bond over these 7 years. Then, a man who appeared to be David arrived. Hi, it's our first time meeting in person, isn't it? Hello. David was a man in his early 50s, with an ambitious look about him, like someone who could really get things done. I've seen various company employees in my work, and somehow he gave me the impression of being a bit cunning. I'm really shocked that my wife passed away so suddenly. The funeral will be held soon, so I'd like both you and your father to attend, Jessica. Understood. There were many things on my mind, but the priority was my mother's funeral. My father and I attended my mother's funeral together and saw her off. The funeral went without incident, but there was a dispute over the inheritance. Jessica hasn't seen my wife in 7 years. So, could you please give up the inheritance? What? Wait a minute. Wasn't it David who didn't let me see her? As I said that, my brother interrupted. Sis, are you still saying that? How many times do I have to explain that Dad would never do that? James, believe me, your stepfather told me not to see you and Mom anymore. He told me to leave you alone. No matter how desperately I pleaded, my brother wouldn't believe me. Oh dear, it seems I've become the villain here. Dad's not wrong. Sis is just saying weird things. James. Sis, I don't really understand inheritance, but will you give it up? What? I should at least receive the minimum inheritance, right? What would Mom think if she saw you being so greedy about money? David treated me as if I were money grubbing. Then my father stepped in. Wait a minute. My daughter is only claiming her rightful share. Stop making such accusations. Thanks to my father's words, David closed his mouth. No matter what you say, I'll make sure my daughter gets at least the minimum inheritance. What's this? Are you and Sis conspiring to make things difficult for us? That's not the case. This is just a claim of rights. The discussion was difficult, and in the end, I was able to receive only the minimum inheritance, but a rift formed between my brother and me. It was because I had become antagonistic with David, my brother's trusted stepfather. I had finally seen my brother after so long, only to be disliked by him. Losing my mother was sad enough, and this made it even harder mentally. And then, more misfortune struck me. My father was diagnosed with cancer. He was given only 1 more year to live. I felt like I was being crushed by repeated misfortunes. Why is this happening to me? I became quite negative. But my father, noticing my change, spoke to me gently. Jessica, everyone dies someday. It's not something we can control. I've been happy living with you all this time, and I intend to enjoy the time I have left to the fullest. Dad. After that, my father and I went on trips and did everything he wanted to do before he passed away. Losing both of my beloved parents was incredibly painful. But my father's last words were, "Look forward and enjoy every moment of life." So I wiped away my tears and chose to move on. My brother came to my father's funeral, but he brought David with him. Because of that, my brother was aggressive towards me, and all he talked about was my father's inheritance.
Sis, you forcibly took part of Mom's inheritance, so I'm definitely taking Dad's inheritance.
I didn't want to fight or be hostile anymore, so I quietly agreed. Yes, of course. I was planning to give it to you anyway. I said that and made arrangements for the inheritance to be transferred to my brother. I haven't seen my brother since then. He hasn't contacted me, and I felt awkward reaching out to him. A few years passed, and I met Robert through a friend's introduction. He was considering marriage, and I decided to tell him everything. That both my parents were gone, and that I was almost estranged from my only sibling, my brother. Robert listened to everything and still wanted to marry me. I fell in love with him. We continued to date smoothly and received a marriage proposal. This must be what it feels like to be on top of the world. But at the moment, I suddenly received a call from my brother. Hello, James? It's been a while, hasn't it? What's up? Oh, speaking of which, I have something to tell you too. I was so happy to hear from my brother after so long that I started talking rapidly. Then, my brother interrupted me with something incomprehensible.
Sis, why didn't you come to Mom's funeral? I never thought you were such a terrible person.
What?
I didn't think my sister was such a terrible person.
I was confused by my brother's sudden accusation over the phone. What's going on? Why are you saying something so nonsensical all of a sudden?
Nonsensical? Mom's dead, you know.
Wait, James. Calm down.
How can I calm down?
Was this some kind of cruel joke? No, it was too harsh for that. But there was no hint of lying in my sobbing brother's voice. I took a deep breath and calmed myself, and spoke slowly to my brother. James, Mom died 5 years ago. Then my brother's shocking reply came.
What are you talking about? Mom didn't die back then.
What? What are you talking about? You saw Mom's body too, didn't you? And we even had the funeral. I couldn't understand why my brother was saying such things.
No. Mom was alive. I lived with her for about 3 years after that.
What? What do you mean?
So I was living with Mom.
I really couldn't understand what my brother was saying. Mom was alive? It's best to go along with the story at times like this.
Yes, but they said she would die soon without an offering. I gave all the money I earned as an offering.
What? At that moment, I realized that my brother had been deceived.
But the offering wasn't enough, and Mom died.
James, can you introduce me to the person you've been making offerings to?
Of course. You should be saved too, sis. That person found where Mom was and rescued her.
James. Later, I went with my brother to meet the person he had been making offerings to. The place was in a regular office building, where counseling was conducted.
If you counsel with the teacher, he'll solve any problem for you.
Teacher. When my brother led me into a private office, David was there. Why are you...
Oh, if it isn't Jessica.
Wait a minute. You're the one who remarried my mother and became James's stepfather, right? Why is James calling you teacher?
James and I have a patient-teacher relationship.
What? No, you lived with James, right? James even called you Dad.
Sis, what are you talking about? David is a counselor. Dad died 3 years ago, remember?
Wait, David. Are you brainwashing James?
What are you talking about? I've just been listening to him. Before that, I was counseling his mother.
What? You deceived my mother too?
Sis, don't say such terrible things like deceived.
James!
Jessica seems quite confused. Well, it's understandable. Losing both parents can often lead to mental illness.
What are you talking about?
You've unconsciously put a stopper in your mind to avoid facing reality. You're suppressing the grief of losing your parents. I can help you release it.
Stop it! I'm already looking forward and living my life.
Really? Aren't you just enduring it?
I'm not enduring anything.
It's better not to force yourself. If you do as I say, your heart will feel much lighter.
Really?
Really? James became cheerful that way too. So why not entrust yourself to me?
Yes, please.
Good girl. Now sit here and think about your mom and dad. When I place my hands on your head, the sad feelings will magically disappear. How about it? Do you feel lighter?
No, I don't feel any lighter.
I see. Maybe it's because the offering is 0, so there's not enough power.
What?
If you really want to get better, you have to make a lot of offerings.
Is that so?
Yeah. So let's start with an offering of $1,000.
$1,000?
That's still not enough to be completely healed. You need to make more and more offerings.
Is that so? James made offerings too, right?
Yes, he's been making offerings ever since he graduated from high school and started working. That's how he was able to find his mother and regain happy days. But the offerings stopped at one point, and his mother really died this time. So he's reflecting on that and increasing his offerings to be saved.
I see.
I called out towards the entrance.
That's how it is, Robert.
As I said that, the door to the room opened, and my fiancé Robert walked in. Who exactly are you? David asked with a suspicious look at Robert, who then handed David his business card. I'm a lawyer. I've been listening to your conversation, and it seems you've been brainwashing James and swindling a large sum of money from him. A lawyer?
He's also my fiancé, and we're gonna sue you and recover the money. As I said that, David momentarily looked flustered, but then snorted and retorted.
I thought you'd say something like that. James was saved by me. There's no fact that I deceived him. I was just providing legitimate counseling. Right, James?
David asked my brother with a triumphant look on his face.
My brother glanced at us and then said, I was deceived by you and forced to contribute a large sum of money. James, you...
David's eyes widened at my brother's statement.
It seems your brother intends to sue you. Wait, this must be some mistake, right? James, I saved you. Are you gonna betray me like this? Teacher, I do think that thanks to you, both my mother and I felt relieved many times. But it's also true that you were gradually brainwashing us, right? In fact, I became unable to make sound judgments because of you. You brought a woman who looked like my mother and made me believe that she was actually alive. And then you instilled fear that she would die if I didn't make offerings. Moreover, you disposed of all the photos of my mother and me without my noticing and replaced them with composite photos of a fake mother. The pictures were so sophisticated and natural that I naturally believed the fake mother was my real mother. And before I knew it, almost all of my salary from the years since I graduated from high school and started working was taken by you. When I met my sister and saw the real photos of my mother, the brainwashing suddenly broke. That's when I decided to sue you, capturing evidence of you actually demanding an exorbitant amount of money. You betrayed me! Don't mess with me. You're the one who kept swindling money from me and my mother. You brainwashed us, telling us not to meet my sister and even made us lie that you were our stepfather. My mother died without seeing my sister for years. I'll not only get back the money you took from me, but also the money you took from my mother. You've sucked money from us and enjoyed yourself. Now suffer misfortune. Ah!
My brother angrily confronted David with such intensity that David stumbled back in surprise.
Then we'll see you in court,
Robert said, and we left the scene. After that, James sued David under Robert's legal representation. David was offered to pay back the total amount of $300,000 that he had swindled from my brother and mother. Not only was David offered to pay compensation, but his outrageous fraudulence became known to his previous patients and their families. And he seems to be in serious trouble due to lawsuits and compensation claims from many people. But he had been doing as he pleased for so long that he deserved to be punished. I realized that our relationship had been strained because of the brainwashing, and with everything resolved, the resentment between my brother and me disappeared. My brother also attended my wedding with Robert. I hadn't seen my brother for many years because of David, but now I want to fill that gap by regularly meeting and getting along well with my only sibling.
James and Jennifer are on our side too. Besides, they'll be gone soon.
At those words, my hand stopped.
Hey, are you really going to do it?
Don't say do it. It sounds bad. It's an accident. An accident. My eldest son David and his wife Lisa were talking so seriously that they didn't notice I was there. Jessica, the wife of my second son, spoke to me. "Jennifer, call the police right away." At those words, I hurriedly called the police. I am Jennifer. I turned 71 last month. I have dedicated myself to household chores without working outside, spending 50 years with my husband, James. Thankfully, we've had a joyful time. We were blessed with 2 sons. It seems ordinary, but I think it's a very happy thing. James is the second-generation president of a small wholesale company. He took over the company founded by my father-in-law 20 years ago. Blessed with customers, the business is going well. Now, our sons are working in my husband's company as executive directors. My eldest son, David, graduated from a famous domestic university. He's always been an excellent student, praised by his classmates' mothers. I was proud every time I attended a class observation. He studied hard even after going to college and graduated as valedictorian. Then he joined our company, where my father-in-law was president at the time. I was worried that he was too serious and didn't know how to interact with women, and his relationships with women were a complete failure. But 10 years ago, he brought home a beautiful woman 1 year younger than him. From what I had heard, she didn't seem to come from a wealthy family, but she always smiled at me and gave me gifts on birthdays. Living nearby, she often brought me food, saying, "Jennifer, I made too much." I found her to be a kind, thoughtful, and intelligent woman. They didn't have children, but I loved David and his wife very much. The problem was my second son. My second son, Daniel, was not as good at studying as David, but he seemed popular with girls, and during his college years, he was always with different girls. He barely graduated, and instead of joining my husband's company, he rebelled and joined a general company. There he met Jessica, a woman of the same age, and married her. Jessica, unlike Lisa, was unfriendly and kept our relationship to a minimum. She was very formal, giving gifts on Thanksgiving and Christmas, and regularly coming home. But she seemed to want to keep her distance from us. She didn't want to live near our house and bought a condominium in the next town. Above all, I couldn't feel any warmth in her flat tone of speech. Daniel worked in a general company for about 10 years, then resigned and joined my husband's company. But he's free-spirited even in the company. My husband and David seem to have trouble dealing with him. But even such a son is dear to me as a parent. I expect David and Daniel to continue working hard for the company. One day, I went shopping alone. Spring is coming soon. I was looking for clothes to wear at the company's entrance ceremony. Although I don't work, I'm a director in name only. I rarely go to the company, but I occasionally work from home, preparing gifts for customers and socializing with other corporate presidents' wives. As part of that job, I attended the entrance ceremony every year. I headed to my favorite clothing store in the shopping mall. That's when I spotted a familiar figure. Lisa? It looked like her. No, but she was walking with a man. David is at work. It must be a case of mistaken identity. But I was still curious about the two. They went into a high-end brand store. I felt relieved. It was indeed a mistake. Lisa is supposed to be frugal. I've never seen her with any brand name items, and David and Daniel's salaries are no different from regular executives. They probably could afford luxury brands, but they would only buy them on special occasions. David wouldn't say it, but Daniel often complained to my husband.
The salary is too low. I can't buy anything. I should have changed jobs.
Daniel has children, so he probably has even less room for extras than David. Anyway, Lisa, who specializes in housework without working, would never go to such a high-end brand store. I made an unpleasant mistake. I found myself laughing at the thought, and I left the place. Then, my husband's company had its entrance ceremony. This year, there was one experienced hire and 3 recent graduates. It's not a big company, but about this many employees join every year. This year, all were locals, and I hoped they would work for us for a long time as we successfully finished the entrance ceremony. The problem came after. Heading to the president's office, I found Daniel and my husband arguing.
It's strange, isn't it? Father must be doing something.
Daniel was yelling at my husband, his face red. David was trying to calm Daniel down in a panic. "What's going on?" I asked in a hurry.
The books don't add up,
Daniel yelled. The books? I had no idea what they were talking about. I asked for details. Daniel said that no matter what, the numbers seemed off.
You must be faking it.
My husband yelled back.
Don't talk nonsense. This is why second-generation presidents who don't know the world. What do you mean?
The argument between my husband and Daniel seemed to escalate.
Enough already!
At that moment, David's angry voice rang out.
I'll look into the numbers. Both of you stop. Don't talk about something that might make other employees anxious in the company.
David said to the two. The eldest son is reliable after all. I was impressed by David. My husband and Daniel fell silent at David's words. I felt reassured, leaving it to David. A few days later, David told my husband,
There was nothing suspicious in the books, but there was one double payment. I contacted the other party right away, and they'll shift it to next month. Daniel probably thought that was strange. Thanks to him, we noticed. It's a good thing.
My husband was impressed by David's words. The intelligence to explain Daniel's misunderstanding like this. Such an excellent son. I sometimes wonder if he's really mine. The business of April and the family quarrel had settled down, and I was dining with my husband, a long-awaited meal with my husband. We splurged a little on a course meal at the region's top high-end steakhouse, which had earned a Michelin star. The dazzling meal was a joy to the eyes. Soon we should think about paying David and Daniel enough so that they can take their families to places like this. I said to my husband while enjoying the meal.
No, David maybe, but it's too soon for Daniel.
My husband laughed at that. But Daniel has 3 children, and he's always saying his salary is low, isn't he?
If he worked as hard as David, I might consider it.
My husband laughed off my suggestion. Oh, come on, I replied, somewhat exasperated. We had all the courses and our stomachs were getting full. I'll bring the dessert now, said the waiter, taking our drink order and stepping back. My husband was content, sipping his coffee.
Oh, a call. I'll be right back.
The dessert will be here soon, so hurry back. My husband checked his mobile phone and stood up. Left alone in the room, I sipped my coffee. A quiet atmosphere. I couldn't help but hear voices from the next room.
So you see,
that voice was louder. At the same time, it seemed like a voice I had heard before.
Calm down, we're just saying we'll watch the situation for now.
It was my eldest son, David. The previous voice must have been Lisa. Were they here for an anniversary or something? I was delighted to realize that the two were coincidentally in the next room. When my husband returned, we would go say hello. They would be surprised to see us here. I quietly waited for my husband. I didn't intend to eavesdrop, but I could hear the familiar voices of the two quite well.
What are you going to do by watching? I don't think Daniel would notice either.
No, their voices were quite loud. Fortunately, this room was the second from the back. The voices of David and Lisa, and the farthest room should only reach here. It's good that it's us, but it would have been a nuisance to others. I thought I should warn them. However, what followed was not a matter of warning. It'll be fine. James and Jennifer are on our side. Besides, they'll be gone soon anyway. At those words, my hand stopped.
Hey, are we really doing this?
Don't say doing. It sounds bad. It's an accident. An accident. The two were talking so seriously that they didn't realize I was here, or that their voices could be heard in the next room. First of all, the money. You can deceive more, right?
Last time I said it was a double payment, and they believed me.
But what should I say if Daniel catches on this time? I looked up. Frozen. I didn't want to think about it. David had always been serious. But hearing this conversation, I turned pale. I was sure. The cause of the argument between Daniel and my husband after the entrance ceremony. It was these two. They were embezzling the company's money. I called my husband with trembling hands, but he didn't answer. Perhaps the call was taking too long. Someone I could rely on, I thought, and dialed my mobile phone again.
Hello?
That person answered immediately, Daniel, where are you? Come here right away. My second son, Daniel. He must have noticed my panic. He said he would come right away and hung up. Within 5 minutes, my husband arrived with Daniel and his wife, Jessica. He had met my husband outside, and he must have told him that I had called.
Jennifer, what's going on? Daniel said you called him.
I silenced my husband's words with a shh and a finger to my lips. The ice cream dessert that had arrived while my husband was on the phone was already starting to melt. I quietly pointed to the next room. The three exchanged glances. They quietly sat down and focused on the voices coming from the next room. While my husband was away, I had been listening to the terrifying conversation next door alone. And even as time passed, the two continued their conversation. Only when the waiter brought food did the conversation pause. And then it started again. I felt sick at being betrayed by David and the content of that betrayal. "Lisa?" Jessica whispered. The voices from next door were audible, and my husband Daniel and Jessica must have realized who was there.
So, daffodils, you know? There are accidents where people mistake them for vegetables and eat them.
Lisa's voice could be heard. The three probably didn't understand the content yet.
At least there will be a hospital stay for a while. If we're lucky, a funeral. So, make sure the embezzlement doesn't get discovered until then.
Daniel let out a small,
"What?" So if that is the case, we can wait and see, right?
David's voice was also heard. It was the same conversation over and over.
"No, we can't stop the money."
At Lisa's voice, David said,
"If they find out, they won't hand over the company to me." "It's impossible. There's no way they'll find out. Or rather, before they do, right?"
The conversation must have seemed serious. Jessica quickly activated the voice recorder on her mobile phone. My husband said nothing. Silent. Daniel was trembling with anger.
"Before they find out, daffodils. So that's why they were planted in the garden." "Yes, that's right. I've been bringing in my cooking, and they seem to like it. So even if it tastes a little off, they'll eat it, saying, 'Oh, I messed up.'"
I understood the two's plan and their hidden faces.
"What should we do? We need to feed them plenty. How much insurance money do you think they have?"
Lisa's cheerful voice was followed by loud laughter.
"Knowing father, he's got a lot on it. Finally, I'll be the president. It was worth obeying them all this time."
David's triumphant voice. Daniel stood up in anger. My husband said nothing to stop him. "No!" It was Jessica who stopped him. "Why?" I said to Jessica. She was heartless. She hadn't been deeply involved with us, so it must have seemed like someone else's business. But Jessica calmly said,
"If we confront them here, it will play into their hands. Surely Jennifer and James will be swayed by David and Lisa."
My husband and I fell silent.
"So what should we do? They're trying to poison father and mother,"
Daniel said. To that, Jessica replied,
"It's okay. We have evidence. So, Jennifer, please call the police right away."
"Huh?" I flinched at those words. Wasn't calling the police going too far?
"This is outright embezzlement, and they're trying to put those two in danger.
It's a crime. If we leave it like this, Jennifer and James will be at the mercy of those two. But Jessica's words made me realize, that's right, if we continue like this. The thought sent shivers down my spine. I hurriedly called the police. Jessica explained the situation to the waiter, asking them to slow down the service to the two and make sure they didn't escape. And she also apologized for the inconvenience. If she hadn't been there, Daniel and my husband, with their heads hot with anger, would have stormed next door, and I, drained of all energy, would have forgiven the two without doing anything. After a while, we heard the sirens of police cars. Hearing that, Jessica went outside to guide the police. The three of us were told by Jessica to wait in the room, as we probably wouldn't be able to stay calm, so we decided to do so. We heard Jessica and the police's voices, and then they opened the door to the next room. What is this? Lisa's voice was heard. Jessica? And the two seemed to have noticed Jessica. David, Lisa, I've heard your conversation. I thought it necessary, so I called the police. Let's talk at the police station so we don't cause trouble for the restaurant. Jessica's calm voice had never sounded so reliable.
What are you talking about? We were just having a normal conversation.
Yeah, what will James and Jennifer say when they find out about this? The two probably thought Jessica did this on her own. They mentioned our names and resisted loudly. You're trying to frame David by calling the police because Daniel can't become president? Don't take it out on us. Lisa said that. Hearing those words from next door, my husband stood up.
Father.
Daniel looked at my husband. The battle was still going on in the next room. For now, let's move. Jessica's voice. Following that,
Can we ask you to come voluntarily?
the police officer asked the two. Voluntarily? No, I'm not going. I haven't done anything wrong. Lisa said that.
Yeah, that's right. There's no need to go.
David's voice was also heard. Is that so? I thought you might have an excuse. Well, we're going to the police station now to submit a report. Shall we go? Jessica said that. She must have spoken to the police officer. The two didn't seem to feel any remorse. We had to go to the police station ourselves, so we stood up. I stumbled a bit. Daniel supported me.
Mother, are you okay?
Yes. Daniel had become quite reliable, though. He had been through a lot. We left the room. In the hallway were police officers, probably calling out to the next room. David and Lisa must have been in the back.
Mother, are you there?
David shouted as if he could hear us, probably having just realized we were there. His voice sounded frantic. If you want to make excuses, I think you should come with us. Next, the police will come with an arrest warrant to pick you two up. Jessica calmly said that. The two seemed to have stood up at her words. I had completely forgotten about it in shock, but Jessica had taken care of the bill. And so, David and Lisa were taken to the police station in a police car. We followed them in our car. When we arrived at the police station, David and Lisa, who had arrived earlier, seemed to be appealing to the police, saying things like, "It's a misunderstanding," and
It's Jessica's mistake.
we could hear them from outside the room. Another officer guided us to a separate room. There, I told everything I had heard earlier about embezzling the company's money and about preparing daffodils to feed us. As I spoke, I became frustrated and started to cry. The officer was considerate of me. My husband also embraced my shoulder.
Regarding the company's loss, please investigate in detail tomorrow and submit a report summarizing the embezzlement and the amount of damage,
the officer said. Daniel responded to the officer's words. I can't forgive them for trying to endanger our parents more than anything else, Jessica stated clearly. I was happy that she was so angry for us. The officer said that since they hadn't actually acted, they couldn't be arrested for attempted crimes. However, it seems they could be arrested for a preparatory offense after listening to the conversation between the two that Jessica had recorded. They had actually prepared daffodils as poison and had been providing us with food to lower our guard. The photos I had taken of Lisa's cooking would also be evidence. I hadn't taken them with that intention, but I thought it was surprising how they came in handy. As I talked to the officer and listened to Jessica's voice, my sadness turned into bubbling anger. They must be arrested and made to reflect. But more than that, the feeling of being betrayed by my eldest son, whom I had raised with care, and his wife, whom I had adored, grew stronger. I thought they should see hell. I was scared of myself for thinking that. As a parent, I might be disqualified for thinking that way. But I also think it's inevitable to feel that way because I'm a parent. We decided, with Jessica and Daniel, that it would be best not to see David and Lisa. My husband, who was completely angry, didn't want to see them in the first place, and I might forgive them if I saw their faces. That's not true. I'm pretty angry too. But it was also true that I might forgive them if they apologized. We left the rest to Daniel and Jessica and went straight home. It seemed that Jessica's mother had come to play with the grandchildren, and she was taking care of them. So they told us not to worry and to rest. I was very grateful for that feeling. The next day, the police contacted us. In the end, the two didn't admit to anything. However, Daniel investigated the embezzlement facts and amount in one day. It was about 10 years, starting from the first year of their marriage. They had embezzled nearly $2 billion, sometimes a few $100s a month, sometimes a large amount. When I heard that, everything went dark before my eyes. I had been deceived for so long. Jessica, who had come to care for me, took care of the housework and communication with the police on my behalf since I couldn't move. It seems that Jessica's mother continues to take care of the children. I feel sorry for causing trouble to my grandchildren. Daniel consulted with the police and filed a complaint. Now, at least David will be arrested. I feel relieved, regretful, and indescribable. But thanks to Jessica, I didn't lose myself. And they were also arrested for the preparatory offense. The planted daffodils in Jessica's recorder became irrefutable evidence. The two of them stuck to their claim of knowing nothing. They seemed to have no intention of reflecting on their actions. For the embezzlement, Daniel filed a criminal complaint against David and Lisa. It seemed that the embezzled money was being given to a man named Toshin, a club waiter whom Lisa was supporting. Did David know about this? If he knew, he's a complete fool. During the trial, Toshin was called as a witness. My husband was going to be the next president, so the money was good. I really didn't know it was embezzled money, and I have no feelings for her beyond being a customer. Just a customer. At Toshin's words, Lisa became frantic. Toshin, you said you wanted to marry me. I supported your sales. Lisa screamed. What are you talking about? You! David also yelled. No, really spare me. You know, it's just sales talk. It's impossible. Toshin coldly cut off Lisa. Serves her right. I almost burst into laughter. From this, it seems David didn't know. Apparently, he had been sending the money to his not-so-wealthy family. Caught by a foolish woman. It's a real shame. In the end, both were found guilty. As for Lisa, she was even rejected by her beloved Toshin in front of everyone. Jessica and Daniel laughed loudly when the trial was over. It really served them right. I probably saw Lisa with luxury brands before, and the man next to her was Toshin. I should have noticed at the time, but well, it turned out fine in the end. And the two were also indicted for the preparatory offense. With all the evidence in place, none of their excuses were accepted. Naturally, they were found guilty. Although they were given a suspended sentence for this matter, they received a prison sentence for embezzlement, so they will be in prison for a while. David cried and apologized to me, but I had no intention of forgiving him. He was fired from the company. All insurance money was transferred to Daniel. My husband clearly stated that he would make Daniel his successor. David, now unemployed, divorced Lisa. It's really good that he broke ties with such a woman. I don't want to be involved with David anymore, but the blood connection cannot be severed. The police also told us to support him so that he doesn't make the same mistake. But David is an adult, and that woman is gone. He will surely manage to live on his own without relying on his aging parents. Trust doesn't return so easily. I probably won't be able to trust David until I die. After that, Daniel firmly took over my husband's work as a successor. I was truly helped by Jessica. Without her, this matter would not have been resolved. I went to Jessica's house with a thank you gift. Grandma! My grandchildren ran towards me, looking happy. Jessica saying, "Sorry for the mess," guided me to the living room. There's some distance, so I hadn't visited Daniel's house in a while. Coming after a long time, it was so neatly arranged that I couldn't think of it as messy. And I was very pleased to see a framed photo of my 3 grandchildren, my husband, and me that we had taken some time. Jessica, thank you so much for everything. I expressed my deep gratitude. No, I've only done what's natural, Jessica said calmly as always. Actually, I used to be uncomfortable with Jessica. You didn't try to get close to our house, did you? So, I muttered softly. I knew you felt that way, but that's okay, Jessica said. I think of you too as Daniel's parents, and I truly cherish you. If I let my emotions get involved, it might lead to unpleasant feelings. So I thought it was important to keep some distance, to cherish you both. I was deeply impressed by her words. Lisa was always trying to flatter me, and I was deceived by her and doted on her. But I was really foolish not to have noticed Jessica's feelings for us. "Grandma, look, a present!" my young grandchild Sarah said, handing me a clay craft. "Before Grandma came, Mom and I made it. When I said I wanted to make a present for Grandma, she taught me how." The small clay piece was misshapen and couldn't be called skillful, but I found the clay very dear. "Oh, Sarah, thank you. Grandma is so happy. I'll treasure it." My words made my grandchild happy too. I'm glad Daniel married Jessica. My grandchildren and Daniel will be fine with her around. Jessica, thank you so much. I'm counting on you from now on. My grandchild, looking at me curiously as I spoke, smiled along with me.
Ugh, you all need to shut up, always nagging at me. Yeah, I get it. I'm the bad guy here. Happy now?
Laughing flippantly, the person speaking to me was embarrassingly my husband. If I had known he was such a lowlife from the beginning, I never would have married him. But now, it's too late. As I was thinking this, an unexpected voice yelled at my stupid husband. "What?" "My name is Emily, a 28-year-old office worker. I live with my husband Liam and we don't have any children yet. I also have my precious little chihuahua, Lulu, who I've had since I was single. She's a clever little troublemaker, always scratching at drawers to drag things out."
Oh, by the way, I'm having dinner with Ethan next Saturday night.
My husband mentioned this over dinner.
With your brother. You two are really close, aren't you?
Ethan is my brother. My husband and brother have been friends since elementary school and quickly became close because of their shared interests like soccer. Sometimes I even get jealous of how close they are.
Ethan told me the other day, has Emily's cooking ever made you sick?
Ugh, my brother is still as rude as ever. I was a bit annoyed by that comment. If you have an older sibling, you may relate, but I think there are two types. One is the type that dotes on the younger sibling. One of my friends has a younger sister and loves her even more than her parents do, she claims. The other type is a bully, always demanding what's yours. My brother falls into this category.
Huh? Not eating the strawberry? Well, I'll take it then.
The person who would casually swipe the strawberry off my cake that I was saving for last was my brother. Even now, it makes me mad. My brother and I have never really gotten along, but I do owe him one big thank you.
One of my friends wants your number. Some people have weird tastes, huh?
He said this with a sigh, handing over the contact info. That friend turned out to be Liam, my now husband. So my brother was like a cupid for our love. When we decided to get married, my drunken brother said to Liam,
"You sure about this? You can still back out. She's like a gorilla at home, you know?"
To which my husband replied,
"You're the only one who thinks that. I've been interested in Emily for a long time."
That's what my husband told me. His words were met with a "gross" from my brother. What an awful brother. My husband Liam was a star of the soccer team and was quite popular in our generation. Thinking back, my brother was just as popular, but I never understood why. At home, he was arrogant, selfish, and gorilla-like. Wait, am I saying the same thing as my brother? Even after marriage, Liam was as kind as ever, and I was very happy. I didn't realize that this happiness was slowly beginning to crumble. One day, my husband came home visibly frustrated.
"Oh, today was the worst."
"Welcome back. Oh, what happened?" It was rare for Liam to get this angry. Apparently, as he was about to get in the car to come home, he noticed a scratch on it.
He said it wasn't there this morning, but he honestly wasn't sure when it happened. I should have installed a dash cam. My husband's car didn't have a dash cam. I had one in my car, but my husband has been driving his current car for nearly 10 years because he likes it. I had suggested getting a dash cam, but he said, I have never been in an accident or anything, so I think I'm good for now. He kept putting it off, saying things like that, but this time he seemed quite upset. Emily, I'm sorry, but can you go to the car shop tomorrow and get a dash cam installed? I don't really understand machines. Since I had the next day off from work and had no particular plans, I gladly agreed. The next day, my husband went to work in my car. I had driven my husband's car a few times, but as someone who usually drives a compact car, his larger car felt a little scary to me. That night, when I told my husband that the installation was successfully completed, he was in high spirits, saying, Now I can feel safe no matter what happens. Seeing his response, I thought to myself, that's right, I can feel safe no matter what happens too, and smiled a little. Soon after, my husband would fall into hell. Around this time, I noticed that my brother had been contacting me more often. It wasn't anything serious, just casual conversations like, How have you been? Or, Are you getting along with Liam? Mostly, we shared trivial updates about our lives. I found my brother's behavior a little strange, but I thought, maybe he's finally starting to find his little sister cute? Bro, it's great that you're friends with Liam, but you're going out drinking too much lately. When I said that, my brother went silent for a moment, then said, sorry. Naomi and I have been fighting a lot and I have things I want to talk about. He laughed over the phone. Naomi is my brother's wife and my sister-in-law. My brother and Naomi were high school classmates and have been dating since then. I don't think of my brother this way, but he and the beautiful Naomi were known as the most attractive couple in school. I was also close to Naomi, as she was my senior in the same club, and we had been friends since our student days. Then, one day, something happened. I still remember vividly. It was a day of heavy rain from the morning, and my husband was in a bad mood as he watched the weather forecast. Oh, rain all day. I hate going to the company for negotiations today. The road is narrow. His company doesn't have company cars. They reimburse for gas, but employees must use their personal cars for outside work. Recently, the company's performance has been improving, and the president has finally started considering buying a few company cars next year. He happily told me the other day, so I said to him, Why don't you use my car today? I realized after I said it that my car is pink and maybe it's too cute for my husband to drive. He seemed to think the same thing, hesitated for a moment, but then said, Is that okay? Last time I drove Emily's car. It handled well. I'll take you up on that. And he went to work as usual. Well, time for me to go to work too. With that thought, I left the house as usual. The rain was getting stronger, almost like a typhoon. My usual commute route looked like a different road in the heavy rain, even with the wipers on full blast, and today I was commuting in my husband's unfamiliar car. I shouldn't have switched cars, I thought. That's when it happened. Ah! With a loud thud, the car I was driving crashed into a utility pole. At first, I didn't understand what had happened, but when I slowly opened my eyes, I saw a passenger car right next to mine. That's right, that car suddenly jumped out from the side, and I swerved to avoid it and hit the pole. Then I lost consciousness. I thought I heard the sounds of police and ambulance sirens in the distance. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed. Hey, Ethan, Emily's awake. A familiar voice, it was my sister-in-law Naomi. Naomi, why are you here? Where am I? Ouch! I felt a little pain, perhaps from hitting my head. My hands and feet moved properly. If I hadn't turned the steering wheel at the last moment during the accident, I might not be alive now. The thought sent chills down my spine. Hey, Emily, stay still. Lie down quickly. I'm here with you. My brother, with tears in his eyes for some reason, was sitting next to Naomi. Seeing my brother like that, Naomi chuckled, Ethan, you're overreacting. Calm down. Looking at the two of them, I asked, more importantly, why are you two here? Where's Liam? At my question, the smiles on their faces vanished instantly. The hospital tried to contact Liam first from your address book, but he didn't answer because he was at work, so they called me next. My brother explained. I had written emergency contacts in my address book. First was, of course, my husband Liam. Second, after considering my parents, I chose my brother who lives nearby. Third were my parents. It seemed the hospital had contacted them from my belongings after I was rushed in. Then, the two of them looked at each other with awkward faces. "It's okay, big brother. I have a pretty good idea of what's going on," I told them. The day I drove my husband's car to get the dashcam installed, I felt something off the moment I got in. A strong perfume scent, familiar and unpleasant. That's right, our dog Lulu barked more than usual at my husband the other day, and I smelled the scent then. My woman's intuition kicked in, and I opened the dashboard. Recent movie ticket stubs and a single earring I hadn't recognized fallen under the passenger seat. It seemed my bad feeling had come true. At my worst, the two looked surprised but said, "Calm down, okay?" My brother showed me something. I knew it. Afterwards, the doctor came into the room and examined me. There were no abnormalities in my brain or body. The pain in my head was from a scratch on my forehead, which would heal naturally in a few days without leaving a scar. I was relieved as I didn't want a scar.
It's near a miracle that you came out of that accident with only this. You're really lucky,
the doctor said. My brother and his wife were relieved at the test results, telling me to call them if I needed anything. After saying that, he and his wife went home. A while later, my husband Liam rushed into the hospital room looking frantic.
Emily, you had an accident? Are you okay?"
I explained to my husband what had happened and that I needed to stay in the hospital for a few days. Then my husband said,
Oh, it's not a big deal then. I had so many missed calls from the hospital, I thought I didn't need to rush here."
He sighed and said that to me. I stared at my husband with cold eyes and told him that I was thinking of going back to my parents' house to rest for a while after being discharged from the hospital. The moment I mentioned it, my husband's voice noticeably perked up.
"Oh, that's great. You don't have to worry about me. Take it easy at your parents' place. I'll even come to pick you up. No problem."
His face was clearly delighted. Looking at him, I thought from the bottom of my heart that he was an idiot. As if I would worry about you. I had suspected it, but my husband was indeed having an affair. The fact that he could be so callous to his wife who might have lost her life showed that he was quite infatuated with his lover. His insistence on picking me up from my parents' house was a clear sign that he didn't want me to come home unexpectedly. Enjoy it while you can, you better be prepared. A few days later, my husband came to pick me up when I was discharged. We stopped by our house to pack and then headed straight to my parents' home. Usually, I would sit in the front passenger seat when going out with my husband, but this time I deliberately sat in the back.
Make sure you call me when you want me to pick you up."
Absolutely. I almost laughed at my all-too-obvious husband but managed to hold it in. "Yeah, I understand. Sorry that you'll have to use my car for a while." I didn't feel bad at all, but I spoke apologetically. My husband replied,
No problem at all. I like this car."
He cheerfully said he would take good care of my car and went home in a good mood. I like that car, but I will never drive it again. About a week after returning to my parents' house, I went back to our home. "I'm home!" I shouted loud enough to be heard in any room. Sure enough, I heard a commotion from the back room. A few minutes later, my husband came rushing out.
Hey, I told you to call, didn't I? Why did you come back all of a sudden?"
He seemed quite flustered, almost angry. "Oh, I forgot. Maybe it's because I hit my head in the accident. Sorry. But more importantly, I have something to talk to the person hiding in the back room. Can you bring her out? And hey, your clothes are inside out," I said with a bright smile. My husband's face turned pale in an instant. And then he finally realized that behind me were my parents, my brother and his wife, and even his own parents who had come all the way.
What? Why?
His father, a strict man, yelled,
"Bring her out now."
A few minutes later, after letting everyone into the living room, my husband and his lover awkwardly entered from the back room. No wonder they were uncomfortable. It was 2 against 7. My husband was overwhelmingly at a disadvantage. The two of them looked down and didn't say a word. Everyone, including me, was irritated. "It's been a while, hasn't it? Maria, right?" At my words, the two of them flinched. I knew this woman. She was a year younger than me in high school and was a soccer team's manager. My brother and I were a year apart, and my husband and Maria only overlapped for 1 year. She used to pick fights with me while waiting for Liam, my husband, after practice, even after he graduated and went to college. Emily, you're so tall and stylish. I'm really jealous. I'm so small, but Liam said he likes small girls, so it's surprising. She was the type to pick up fight with a smile on her face. That continued even after Liam graduated and went to college. When I contacted Liam the other day, he replied right away, and I was so happy. Please thank him for me, Emily. Or, they say that relationships between college students and high school students don't last long. Aren't you worried? Were some of the things she said. Back then, I had an inexplicable confidence that my husband was head over heels in love with me, so I didn't pay any attention to her. That must have been frustrating for Maria. I was worried about work, and suddenly Maria started sobbing. Her silly way of speaking hadn't changed at all, and it irritated me greatly. I almost lunged at her, but a glance at my sister-in-law Naomi, who was sitting next to me, told me she felt the same way. She was forcefully holding down her right hand with her left. The two of them explained that Maria worked at the reception desk of one of my husband's company's clients. They had reconnected over old stories and started meeting alone after work, but they insisted that there was nothing suspicious about their relationship. It was just advice, nothing more. My husband kept repeating this like a mantra. Is he crazy? Has he been cursed? Oh, Maria, I saw the tag on your skirt when you came into the room earlier. Isn't it inside out? Immediately, both of them checked her skirt, but of course I was lying. They made a face as if they had been caught, but it was too late. However, my husband's shirt really was inside out. What kind of advice requires you to take off your skirt in someone else's bedroom? Are you stupid? I said that to the two fools. Whether they didn't like my attitude or were too flustered to understand, my husband snapped. Where's the evidence? It's unfair to accuse us without any evidence. He actually had the nerve to get angry? My parents, in-laws, and I were so angry that our faces turned bright red. It was clear that everyone was furious. Hey, you have been noisy since earlier, my brother said, and then he played a video on the TV. It was the footage from the dashcam on the day of the accident. The loud thud made it clear that the impact was quite strong. The other driver, perhaps in shock, initially refused to admit fault. At the hospital, I apparently raged that I wasn't at fault. The police showed the footage to my brother, who was nearby, and it clearly showed the other car speeding into me and running a red light just before the collision. This evidence led to the conclusion that it was almost entirely the other driver's fault. However, the footage before the accident clearly showed my husband and Maria happily driving together. I don't want to go home yet, Maria said. You're really cute. My husband replied, stroking Maria's head at a red light. Then he said, you're so helpless, and drove into a hotel parking lot. On another day, Maria said, work ended early. I wanted to see you. Is your wife okay with this? My husband replied, I told her I'm going out with Ethan, so it's totally fine, and kissed Maria. Ugh! My mother-in-law started crying. Even though I had seen it once before, I felt nauseous. I didn't know the inside of the car was being recorded. That's cheating. My brother looked at my husband with cold eyes and said, Naomi has always been telling me that Liam is definitely cheating, but I always believed there was no way. With a cold look, my brother stared at my husband. Naomi seemed to have stumbled upon an account on social media that looked like Maria's. There were no faces shown, but there were plenty of suggestive photos, like a profile of my husband, the watch he wore, and the interior of his car. I immediately consulted my brother, but at first, he didn't believe it. I heard that this caused a lot of fights between my brother and his wife. Still, it seemed he had some doubts, and he told me that he had been contacting me regularly. The decisive factor was the dashcam footage from the day of the accident. You know how I felt when I saw that footage? My brother asked. My husband, after a brief silence, snapped back. All of you are so annoying, always nagging. Okay, I was wrong. Happy now? Oh, why didn't I notice what kind of a person he was? I wish I could go back to my youth. As I was lost in thought, an unexpected person yelled at my husband, who was laughing in front of me. It was not my brother, sister-in-law, or in-laws, but my daddy, who had been silently listening to the conversation. Hey, you! Who do you think you are? What's with that attitude? What are you doing to my daughter? My brother and I unconsciously trembled at the sight of Daddy like this. My parents are gentle people, especially Daddy, who once said, "Look, Emily, this flower is trying hard to live too." When I was young, I stepped on a flower, and he said this so quietly and kindly. He was kind, even to plants. There was only one time when Daddy, who was like a Buddha, lost his temper with my brother and me. I think it was when my brother and I didn't listen to Mom at all, and then a door in the corner of my memory seemed to open. My brother and I, who usually don't get along, vowed deeply at that moment never to make Daddy angry again. My husband, who had been so bold until now completely subdued by the sight of Daddy, who was completely different than usual. Standing like a guardian deity, Daddy was next to my mother, who was looking at my husband as if he were filth. Afterwards, my in-laws bowed deeply to our family and took my foolish husband home. By the way, Maria, the other woman, was sent home on foot. As they were leaving, my brother told my husband, "I will never forgive you for hurting my precious sister." He said it quietly. By the way, my husband used my brother as an excuse for his secret meetings with his lover, thinking that my brother and I were on bad terms and wouldn't pry too much. "I want to slap you with this right hand right now, but it would hurt my hand. You're not even worth that pain," said my sister-in-law Naomi. Naomi and I were former volleyball players. Unlike me, who was always a reserve, Naomi was the ace attacker. Just thinking about her slapping someone sends shivers down my spine. My ex-husband should consider himself lucky to have escaped with his life. After some time, our divorce was finalized. Thanks to my in-laws, my ex-husband reluctantly paid the compensation in the divorce settlement, spending all his money. "I'll buy a new car with the insurance money from the accident." My ex-husband was all excited about this, but the insurance money for his old car wasn't enough to buy a new one. After paying me the compensation, he was left with just enough to buy a used compact car. "Oh man, driving a compact car is shameful." My ex-husband, who had this prejudice, was happily driving my car even though his own car was totaled in the accident. The reason? Maria, his mistress, had said, "This car is so cute," and his happy face was clearly captured on my dashcam. Speaking of Maria, she seems to have borrowed money from her parents to pay me the compensation in the divorce settlement. Now, under her strict parents' watch, she's working non-stop to pay off the debt. Her relationship with my ex-husband continued for a while, but he became neurotic due to Maria's emotional ups and downs, quit his job suddenly, and now his whereabouts are unknown. Despite this situation, Maria's social media had a single line, "Finally, he's mine. I'll chase him forever." Yes, it seems like it was written only one word. It's like something out of a horror story. My ex-husband got involved with a terrible woman, but that's his problem now. It does not matter to me. As for me, I sold my tainted car and used the money as a down payment for a new one. I rented a place near my office and am living happily with my beloved dog Lulu. Come to think of it, Lulu never warmed up to my ex-husband. Maybe it was her animal instinct? I have been visiting my parents more often, and recently, we celebrated their wedding anniversary with my brother and his wife. As I was serving a strawberry whole cake, I asked my brother, who was sitting next to me, "Brother, do you want a strawberry?" He replied, "Yes, please," like a child. I looked at my brother eating the strawberry with a smile. It seems that from now on, my brother and I will get along well.
Your husband's a construction worker, making $1,000 a month? At my child's kindergarten sports day, I was insulted about my husband. Moreover, she even found fault with the first place prize my son had won. I retorted in anger. My husband and son are nothing like the low-life person you are. What? How dare you talk back, being a dropout? As she and I glared at each other, my husband appeared in his expensive suit and said, "1K is the hourly wage, actually." Suddenly, she was astonished at the identity of my husband, and she ended up completely embarrassed. My name is Lila. While being a mother of one and a homemaker, I'm also active online as an essay-style cartoonist. Balancing parenting and work is tough, but it makes my daily life fulfilling, all thanks to my adorable child and loving husband. I couldn't have imagined having such a happy family in the past, because I was a school refuser during high school. I only attended for the first year or so. Thinking back, I've always had trouble talking to people, so I couldn't fit in with my classmates, and I became an outcast. I started getting teased by my classmates. Before I knew it, I was receiving terrible harassment from the girls' group. They splashed water on me in the restroom, and they spread strange rumors about me. I began to hate going to school, and I spent my teenage years at home. I think I had given up on life back then, but my parents never abandoned me. Thanks to the support of my kind father and mother, I managed to get back on my feet. I may have dropped out of high school, but life isn't all about educational background. I believed in that lesson and continued to work hard to find a profession. I studied illustration and started building my work experience through crowdsourcing. After working hard, I managed to grow enough to make a living in this industry. And I also married a good person who acknowledged me. My husband Guire is a roofer who works for a construction company. He leads a busy life filled with sweat and effort every day. On the other hand, our son Martin is 3 years old, a bright and lively little rascal. Though my husband and I were always busy working together, we raised our child with love. Perhaps because of that, our son is growing up to be a good kid without any problems. Recently, we successfully enrolled him in kindergarten. I was a bit worried, but it seems he's having fun at kindergarten. He even made friends right away. Mom, I'm leaving! Take care on your way! Bye! Today, I'm again seeing off the kindergarten bus with my son on it. When I returned home, I noticed something. Looking at it, the lunchbox was left on top of the shoebox, and it turns out it's my husband's lunchbox. It seems he forgot to take it to work. So I decided to take the lunch to the nearby construction site where my husband would be. When I arrived at the construction site, my husband was working hard, dripping with sweat. Don't neglect safety checks. Make sure to stay hydrated. My husband encouraged his workmates. Then he noticed me and came running over. Here, you forgot this? You brought it all this way? Thank you, Lila. Be careful. You know I'm busy too. Sorry. Just slipped my mind. With that, Guire laughed like a child. Just then, a worker's voice called for my husband from the construction site. I'm going then. Lila, watch out for cars. No sooner had he spoken than my husband briskly returned to the construction site. I couldn't help but smile at his spirited demeanor. That's when it happened one day. I was on my way to the kindergarten where my son attends. Today, a parents' meeting was scheduled there. Upon arriving, I headed for the classroom. That was my destination. Suddenly, a voice called out to me from behind. Oh, could it be? Lila? I turned around, and there stood a woman dressed in expensive clothing. Oh, you are... Her name was Emmeline, a high school classmate of mine. Apparently, she too has a child attending this kindergarten. It's been forever, hasn't it? Since high school? Just as she said, it was the first time in over a decade I'd seen her. But I couldn't find joy in this reunion. Why? Because she was the main reason I had refused to go to school back then. You still look as gloomy as ever. Well, our kids are in the same class, so let's get along. With that, she went into the classroom. I was left standing there, rooted to the spot. This is the worst. Emmeline seemed to think nothing of what happened back then. In fact, there wasn't a hint of an apology in her words. Was it a conditioned response? I tensed up just from seeing her. Fear, anxiety, and anger swirled inside me, but I shook my head and came to my senses. I would only lose if I let a vulgar person like her affect me. I slapped both cheeks to psych myself up and boldly entered the classroom. Now, to conclude, I would like each of you to introduce yourself. Please, starting from over there. The explanation about the facility and the event went smoothly and was over quickly. Next, the parents started introducing themselves. I'm Isla, Zeph's mother. Nice to meet you. The parents began to stand up, one by one. Amid the harmless introductions and responses, a pretentious voice rang out. I'm Emmeline, Alan's mother. My husband is a lawyer. Nice to meet you. She said it with a smug look on her face. It was a blatant display of wealth. Oh, so your husband is a lawyer. She received envious glances from the teacher and other parents, which put her in an even better mood. Thinking back, she always seemed to brag about her branded accessories to her friends in high school. People have different values, but when it's this blatant, it can't be described as anything but tacky. As I was pondering this, I realized it was my turn. I'm Lila, Martin's mother. My husband and I both work, so we want to coordinate our schedules to participate in events. Nice to meet you. I heard from Martin that you are a professional cartoonist, Lila. Yes, I'm serializing some essay cartoons on the web. Oh, that's amazing! I received praise from the teacher and other parents, and couldn't help but blush with modesty. Then Emma Lynn, who was watching, spoke up. Speaking of which, Lila, you were always alone in high school, drawing strange pictures, weren't you? Oh, you two went to the same high school? Yes, we did, but I don't know her very well because she quickly refused to go to school, she said, laughing with a look that seemed to mock my dropping out. She probably didn't like that the focus shifted from her to me. Moreover, she might not have found it amusing that I had become a cartoonist. She used to mock my dream of becoming a cartoonist back in high school. I even had some of my drawings torn while she laughed. The atmosphere in the room quickly soured because of her awful behavior. The teacher, sensing the mood, hastily began to close the parent-teacher meeting. Thank you all for coming today, despite your busy schedules. We really appreciate your support moving forward. Also, we'll be sending out a note later about sneakers. And so, the parent-teacher meeting came to an end. About a month has passed since then. Now my son is practicing for a running race, mostly with my husband. The kindergarten sports day is coming up. Martin, when you run, your posture should be like this. Like this? Martin imitates his father. My husband seems to be busy with work, but he still finds a little time to teach our son how to run. I cheer them on while racking my brain for energy-boosting meals. And day by day goes by, and finally, the day of the sports day arrives. It's held at the nearby elementary school's ground, and lots of parents are gathered. Ball throwing, tug-of-war, obstacle race. The children are joyfully giving it their all. I watch this adorable scene, waiting for my son's turn. I'll finish up work and be there, for sure, he said. My husband had said so, but he was nowhere to be seen. Unfortunately, he had an important job today that he just couldn't miss. At this rate, he probably wouldn't make it on time. I was eagerly waiting for my son's turn, camera in hand, thinking of my husband. Finally, it was time for my son to run. But for some reason, Martin wasn't at the starting line. The teacher seemed perplexed, looking around frantically. I followed suit, scanning the grounds, and spotted my son near the fence. It looked like Martin was with another boy. The boy next to him was Emmeline's son. Alan, wasn't it? As I watched, puzzled, the two of them made their way to the starting position. The teacher fired the starter gun, and the running race finally began. The children ran off with all their might. Go, Martin! I cheered for my son as he ran his hardest. And as a result, Martin won first prize. Martin, you were so fast! Yes, his form was solid, and he looked great. Does he do sports or something? After the running race ended, a friend's mom nearby praised my son's running. I felt as happy as if it were about me. No, nothing special. He's been practicing running with his dad, that's all. Oh, with his father. What a wonderful husband you have. I'm envious. My husband might not even know that today's the sports day. Mine's no good at this sort of thing either. I envy men who can do sports. Oh, it's not like that. He works in a construction company, so he's just confident about his physical strength. I felt my cheeks relax even more as they praised my husband. Speaking of which, Mr. Guire is working at a construction site nearby, isn't he? Yes. Whenever I pass by there, he always greets me cheerfully. And says, watch your step. His smile is wonderful at that moment. It seemed that my husband had become a bit of a celebrity among the moms. It might be flattery, but I was still proud. Then Emmeline arrived. You seem to be in a good mood. She looked noticeably unhappy. She probably didn't like that my family was being praised. Also, she seemed irritated that Alan had lost to Martin. She started to nitpick about my son's first prize. But was that first prize really earned by merit? What do you mean? I asked sharply, and she replied with contempt. Your child probably threatened mine into losing. On what grounds can you say that? He was with my child before the race started, wasn't he? She seems to think that my son threatened Alan during that time. Sure, I was suspicious about the fact that the two boys had come out together late, but there's no way my son would do something so dishonest. I respond with indignation. Martin would never do something like that. Oh, really? I heard a rumor that your husband's a roofer, making $1,000 a month. Ha! Roofing is a job for dumb and rough people, isn't it? He'd have no problem threatening someone. Maybe he even gave your son some pointers. Like father, like son, right? Her prejudice and insulting words made it impossible for me to contain my anger. I could let her talk about me that way, but I couldn't stand her belittling my family. I protested to protect the honor of my child and husband. My husband and son are nothing like you. A vile person like yourself. Ah, how dare you talk like that when you're a dropout? The surrounding parents start to murmur as the heated exchange and glaring continue. In the midst of this, my shoulder is tapped from behind. I turn to see my husband, dressed in a suit, standing there. He says, catching his breath, "Did Martin's running race end already?" "The running race ended a little while ago." "Oh, that's too bad. I hurried, but didn't make it in time." As he speaks, he scratches his head thoughtfully. On the other hand, Emmeline appears to be confused at the sight of Guire in a high-end suit. Why? What happened to those filthy work clothes? Aren't you just a lowly roofer making $1,000 a month? Hearing her words, my husband said with a shy smile, The $1,000 is about the hourly wage." Yes, Guire is indeed a roofer, but he's also the owner of his own construction company since he started it independently. His company has become a great success as a top supplier, renowned for the speed and accuracy of their work. Furthermore, they were on a rapid growth trajectory, expanding into interior design, overseas development, and more. Recently, they were even featured on television and in magazines for their efforts in digitizing the construction process. His nickname in the media is the $1K Dollar Man. The rumor of a monthly income of $1K must have been a misunderstanding passed on by various people. But working so desperately at the construction site? Emmeline's voice trembled, stunned by the shocking truth. Then my husband spoke again, with a shy smile. It's about never forget where you come from. Certainly, he is not in a position that typically involves laboring on site. However, out of respect for fieldwork, Guire still sometimes works on site himself. He also strongly emphasizes safety checks to his workers. This might be because of his respected carpenter father's accidental death due to a safety management mistake. After that tragedy, he switched from carpentry to roofing. Roofing is indeed the highlight of the site, an essential role that is responsible for the lives of the workers. Ensuring that the workers can work safely, setting up proper scaffolding, and assembling the steel frame. Construction is said to begin with a roofer and end with a roofer. My son and I were proud of such a roofer husband. On the other hand, Emmeline, knowing that her husband was faultless, turned her attack on me. "That's so sneaky! You never said he was that amazing." I don't stoop to vulgar tactics like flaunting my husband's profession, unlike someone else. Hearing me say that, Emmeline's face twisted in frustration. Then Martin came running to us. "I won first prize! Thanks to Dad!" "Wow, that's the result of intense training! You did a great job! I'm proud of you!" Guire rejoiced as if it was his own victory, and patted Martin's head. With an even bigger smile, our son continued. "I also tied my friend's loose shoelace before the race. It would be dangerous if they tripped." Those words must have struck Emmeline with a great shock. Now, scornful glances from the parents around her were piercing through Emmeline. She realized that her argument was entirely wrong, and her face twisted in discomfort. "It seems the misunderstanding is cleared, so we'll be on our way now." Saying that, I turned my back on her. But then I remembered something and spoke to her. "You were told in the parent-teacher meeting that Velcro shoes were the rule, weren't you? Didn't you hear?" At that moment, Emmeline's face turned beet red with embarrassment. Since then, Emmeline has never attended any kindergarten gatherings. Her disgraceful behavior at the sports day seems to have affected her deeply. Now in her place, her husband Johnny attends the kindergarten gatherings. He's a sincere man, and after learning about the situation, he came to us to apologize right away. "My wife Emmeline was extremely rude," he said, and apparently he and Emmeline are discussing divorce. I was told that Emmeline has been troubling Johnny with her excessive spending and selfishness for a long time. Moreover, she has been entirely indifferent to parenting, and yet she always insisted on attending kindergarten events, which showed her poor character. For her, kindergarten gatherings were merely a stage to assert her dominance. Johnny finally had enough of such a wife. He had been hesitant to pursue a divorce because of the child, but he decided he could no longer overlook the situation. "Alan, it's all your fault for losing to that kid. I'm sorry." Saying such a thing to one's own child is bound to happen. If anything, the decision was long overdue. Emmeline pleaded with Johnny. "Please, anything but a divorce." But it didn't seem like her wish would be granted. Johnny proudly stated that he intends to gain custody and raise Alan with love. On the way home, he made a request to his son. "Martin, will you continue to be friends with my Alan?" "Yeah!" My son responded in a cheerful voice, waving his hands as he saw off Johnny. His concern was undoubtedly unfounded. Since the sports festival, Martin and Alan had already become friends. According to the teacher, the two often played joyfully together with the other children in games like tag and ball toss. If the children are spending their time in good health, that is the most important thing. And then, on a certain holiday, we were planning to head to town to buy some snacks for the parent-child outing next month. "I'm going to exchange snacks with Alan." "Martin, Dad's definitely going on the outing, so get ready." The two of them excitedly left the house, checking left and right to see if any cars were coming. "Right clear." "Left clear."
My name is Susan, and I am a 62-year-old homemaker. My husband Joseph was an office worker but retired last March and is now re-employed. We live in a place surrounded by farms, and many of the people here are farmers. During the farming season, I help out relatives and local farmers. We have 2 children, and we used to live with our oldest son and his wife. Our second son, John, lives in a nearby town in a used house. Our second son's wife is laid back and a bit airheaded, but she's a lovable and adorable wife. On the other hand, our oldest son's wife, Jessica, who lives with us, is quite responsible, and I thought she was just right for our careless eldest son, Danielle. However, she might be too responsible, worrying about our family's future. As my husband's retirement was approaching, she was thinking about what's next even more than we were. My father-in-law's salary will drop significantly once he's retired. That means we won't be able to live as we have been. She said this with a scary face to my husband and me, so I thought she would take over managing the household finances. Before my husband retired, his salary covered most of our living expenses. Our oldest son also contributed to the living expenses every month, but honestly, it wasn't enough to cover his family and our 5-year-old grandchild. I didn't know how much our oldest son was earning, but since our oldest son's wife was working full-time, I assumed they were doing fine. I took care of all the housework, including dropping off and picking up our grandchild from kindergarten. On holidays, they often left our grandchild with me and went out to play, leaving our oldest son behind. My husband complained to our oldest son about his carefree wife several times. "Did Jessica go out to play again? She's always demanding things but does whatever she wants." Our oldest son, who does whatever his wife says, could only laugh it off. As my husband says, our oldest son's wife always interferes with our actions. When our grandchild was born, my husband bought a minivan so we could all ride together. But our oldest son's wife immediately intervened. "Such a big car is inefficient if we're not going out as a family every day." She made a visibly uncomfortable face even though my husband was paying for the whole car. However, when the car was delivered, our oldest son's wife started using the minivan as the main vehicle. and even the gas card was in my husband's name. If we planned to go to a resort as a family on a weekend, our oldest son's wife would get angry on the day. I'm going out with my friends today, so I will use the minivan. Once she said that, she never changed her mind, and our oldest son's wife ended up using the minivan. It was strange that our oldest son's wife, who was so against buying the minivan, was the one using it the most. Our oldest son was even more interfered with, becoming like a servant to his wife. When our oldest son went to a dinner party with his colleagues shortly after they were married, his wife was furious when he returned home. If you are going to be late, let me know in advance. The oldest son had mentioned a dinner party earlier, but his wife Jessica seemed to have completely forgotten about it. Even when my husband and I intervened trying to soothe Jessica, her anger did not subside. My life's rhythm gets thrown off, so from now on, no more dinner parties. It was a selfish demand, but since our oldest son has a quiet nature, he silently agreed without arguing. Watching Jessica berate our oldest son even in front of her father-in-law and mother-in-law, I felt anxious, thinking that this marriage was a mistake. Our oldest son's salary is entirely controlled by Jessica, and he receives only a small allowance. I felt sorry for him having to pay for his lunch from that little money, so I gave him a lunchbox. Jessica didn't seem to like the lunchbox either and complained to me. Don't send him off with a lunchbox without asking me. It affects our budget. I was so frustrated that I snapped back at her. The lunchbox's ingredients were bought with Joseph's money. So Jessica, don't interfere. Stunned by my words, Jessica couldn't argue back and reluctantly accepted the lunchbox for our eldest son. We were also taken aback by Jessica's attitude when our grandchild was born. During childbirth, Jessica had returned to her parents' house, and even after coming back, she seemed to have little interest in caring for the baby. Since I adored my grandchild, I looked after him all day, but Jessica laughingly said to me, "Mother-in-law, you should thank me. You can take care of your grandchild because of me." Seeing Jessica speak so arrogantly, I realized that she was different from us because Jessica doesn't care for the grandchild. He does not bond with her at all. Whenever something happens, the grandchild clings to me or my husband, and Jessica didn't find that amusing either. Even for kindergarten events, Jessica would show reluctance and say it's bothersome. Mother-in-law can go, right? It's none of my business. Although she probably wants to get along with her child, Jessica just can't make it work. Recently, she apparently went to pick up her child from kindergarten, a rare occasion, but he cried, saying he didn't want to go home with her. When I went to pick him up after receiving a call from the kindergarten, I saw my grandchild running towards me with a beaming smile, while Jessica had a complicated expression on her face. Lately, Jessica's main concern is about my husband and me after retirement. We had been telling our oldest son and Jessica for quite some time that my husband will be rehired after retiring, but Jessica always worried about his salary decreasing. I finally decided to propose something to Jessica. If Joseph is rehired, shall we leave the household finances to you, Jessica? Jessica glared at me with a fierce look, but after thinking for a moment, she answered, "So you mean that I will be in charge of this house?" I nodded. That was my intention. Oldest son's wife, looking perplexed, nevertheless smiled and said, "I understand. From now on, I will take charge of everything." Her smile was airy. But starting in April, when my husband was rehired, we decided to entrust the household finances to our oldest son and his wife. From the next day, the oldest son's wife handed me papers to record the utilities, monthly payments, and food expenses individually. The monthly payments could be seen on our banking cards, but the food costs were only roughly known. When I filed in an approximate amount, the oldest son's wife yelled at me, "You have been buying groceries like this? How pathetic. You are a typical incompetent housewife." I felt like bursting into anger, but I wanted to see how well she could manage things. From April, we planned to live on the salaries of our oldest son and his wife, paying only our share of the food and utilities. But then the oldest son's wife demanded the same amount as before. "I expect father-in-law to contribute the same amount every month," she said. My husband, surprised, immediately replied, "Aren't we living on Daniel and Jessica's salaries now?" To my husband's words, the oldest son's wife responded with a laugh. "What are you talking about? I'm only deciding how to distribute and pay. Father-in-law will pay as before." We didn't understand what she was saying, and she added,
If you can't pay the usual money, please leave this house. You two outdated nuisances are in the way.
Called outdated nuisances, my husband couldn't stand it any longer. How dare you talk to your parents like that? If we were a nuisance, we'll leave. It was rare to see my usually gentle husband so angry. We went to our room to discuss our future. I was worried about what we would do if we left, so I asked my husband, "What will we do if we leave this house?" My husband replied calmly as if his earlier anger was a lie. "We plan to go to John's house. I've already talked to him." Surprised by his unexpected words, my husband continued with a happy face. "Let's give that arrogant oldest son's wife and sloppy Daniel a taste of their own medicine." I still didn't understand what my husband was saying, but I decided to trust him. Our oldest son, who had heard that his wife wanted us to leave, was panicking alone. And, unable to stop her, a truly pitiful son. My husband had already begun preparing for the move, and I started packing too. The oldest son's wife, a little surprised to see that we were really moving, kept making snide comments as we packed.
Be prepared. I'll throw away all the stuff you leave behind. You outdated nuisance couple are slow in preparing for the move.
I had always thought she was awful, but now she seemed to be showing her true colors, hurling one insult after another.
Don't you think about leaving some inheritance for your grandchildren since you don't have much time left in life?
I had never seen my oldest son's wife so intense before, and I was stunned. But after she left, my husband was laughing. She must be thrilled thinking she can make this house and land her own. The area is rural, so there are many large houses, but ours is one of the most impressive ones. The house is old, but we have fixed it up many times so we can still live in it. The land is quite spacious, so if we wanted to build single-family homes, there's enough room for 4 or 5. A week after being told to leave this outdated nuisance of a house, my oldest son's wife came to me with a pleased look on her face.
"Are you ready to move?"
My husband replied with a smile just as big as hers. "We'll be out by tomorrow. Don't worry." We had already moved most of our belongings and only the valuables were left. My oldest son's wife didn't seem to care where we were moving to. She just wanted us out of the house. The next day, as we were leaving, she saw us off at the front door with a confident posture. Our oldest son was hiding in the shadows looking guilty, and I was disgusted with him for being so controlled by his wife. Our grandchild didn't seem to know I was leaving and was crying in his father's arms. Leaving the house wasn't that sad, but I felt like crying for our left-behind grandchild. We headed straight to our second son's house and began unpacking. In stark contrast to my oldest son's wife, my second son's wife is always smiling and makes everything fun. When my second son got married, he bought a used single-family home and my husband helped financially. The house was too big for just the two of them, so I once asked him, "Why did you need to buy such a big house?" He replied with something profound. "Dad told me to buy a slightly bigger house since he was giving me money. He was the one who introduced me to this house in the first place." I wondered why my husband had found a house big enough for 2 families when we already had our own. Looking back, was he anticipating being kicked out of our house? My second son and his wife, who don't have children yet, were living alone in this big house. They said they had been lonely, but now it would be livelier with us around. My second son's wife works but takes care of the housework and everything was in order. When I offered to help, she shyly asked, I'm bad at cooking, so I would like you to teach me, mother-in-law." My second son, who had been listening, said with an exasperated face, "That's right, my wife's cooking has a strange and mysterious taste, so please teach her properly, Mom." Indeed, the meal my second son's wife made that day was all dishes we had never seen before, and both my husband and I were surprised. A month after moving, we had heard nothing from our oldest son, and we had settled into life in our second son's house, as if we had always lived there. However, a few days later, I received a panic call from my oldest son's wife.
"Mother-in-law, the neighbors are talking about church donations and stuff. And someone claiming to be father-in-law's nephew told us to leave the house. What's going on?"
My oldest son's wife seemed confused, and I was equally baffled by her one-sided rant. I tried to calm her down. She still seemed panicked, but something occurred to me. For generations, the people living in that house had served as church elders for a nearby church, and we had to collect donations every year. I remember my husband and I splitting the task and going around the neighborhood to gather contributions. We were also responsible for managing a nearby communal cemetery, collecting maintenance fees, taking care of the grounds. My husband, overhearing my conversation with my oldest son's wife, grabbed the phone and yelled at her. Our family has been the landlords of that area for generations, so we had to take care of everything. He continued with a triumphant look on his face. I forgot to mention, but that house and land aren't mine. They belong to my brother, but now his son, my nephew, has inherited them. I didn't know all the details, but I knew we were only borrowing the place. According to my husband, we were living rent-free in exchange for him taking over the church elder duties and cemetery management for his nephew. My husband had been covering the property taxes, and the maintenance must have been a relief for the nephew. For my husband, it was not only for the sake of his distant living nephew, but also to preserve the family home passed down through generations. With my husband's explanation, my oldest son's wife seemed to grasp the situation, and she snapped back at him.
I understand about the church, but why are we being told to leave?
She yelled without flinching. My husband explained with a sly smile. For quite some time, there has been a talk of developing the area around the house into residential land. It seems the nephew had been holding off on the development out of consideration for us, but since we were kicked out, he told the nephew it was okay to proceed. The nephew was also furious after hearing about my oldest son's wife's heartless actions. Since she wouldn't take on the church elder or cemetery management duties, the nephew saw no need to be considerate and suddenly demanded that she vacate the house. Listening to this, I understood why my husband had encouraged our second son to buy a large house. Either way, my husband had been thinking that we would eventually have to leave that house, and he probably chose our second son as a cohabiting partner over our unreliable oldest son. From my perspective, both were unreliable, but comparing the two wives, a difference emerged. The calculating oldest son's wife, realizing she was at a disadvantage, quickly hung up. That night, my oldest son and his wife came to our second son's house, and my oldest son's wife asserted their rights.
Since we are living in that house now, father-in-law will find us a replacement, and of course, he will pay the rent.
My husband and second son were about to explode with anger at the selfish demands of my oldest son's wife, when my second son's wife interjected with an unrelenting comment. Jessica, we bumped into each other in a strange place the other day, didn't we? At this sudden and inexplicable remark, my second son looked ready to erupt in anger, but his wife showed everyone her mobile phone. On the screen was an image of my oldest son's wife arm in arm with a man none of us had ever seen before. The moment she saw the picture, the color drained from my oldest son's wife's face. The second son's wife continued to press her. I work near that spot, so I have seen you there a few times, she said, showing more pictures one after the other. My oldest son's wife's previous bravado was gone, and she looked down trembling. Even my unreliable oldest son couldn't hold back and yelled, "You've been cheating on me?" Normally, one would give up at this point, but my oldest son's wife wasn't silent.
That's right, I have been cheating. If you didn't have any assets, I would have never married a man like you.
Whether defiant or proud, my oldest son's wife spat out her usual harsh words and left with one last parting shot.
A man without a house or land, I'll be the one to break up with you.
Without a single word of apology, she left my second son's house. Afterwards, my oldest son and his wife officially divorced. He took custody of their child, and substantial compensation was demanded. With the evidence photos taken by my second son's wife, there was no way to deny it. My oldest son rented an apartment and lived with his child. But since we live nearby, I go over to take care of my grandchild. I was worried. They might be lonely without their mother, but they seem happier and more energetic without their disliked mother around. My oldest son's wife, after the divorce and losing the compensation money, borrowed money from her lover and was pressured to repay it, so she fled somewhere. It was probably good for my oldest son to part ways sooner, and all of this was thanks to my second son's wife's efforts. We recently found out that my second son's wife is expecting a baby. Though she often seems absent-minded, it turns out she's the most responsible of all, and I'm sure she will be a great mother. I'll have to take care of 2 grandchildren now, so I want to keep doing my best.